Hello, everyone. You're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and I am your host, as usual, Reed Coverdale. And I've got a special surprise on the other side. He's been on the show before, but he's never shown his face. We've got the LiBROtarian. I don't know if he wants me to say his name. I'll let him decide if he wants to or not. But how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. So I decided to say, like I said to you, like pre-show, the face reveal thing was a joke whenever I had 3,000 followers, and 5,000 followers was kind of realistic. But since the reset, it was kind of like, I don't really want to do that anymore. So why not? Here I am. Here's my face. Hi.
There he is. So we've been going back and forth on each other's channels a lot, and I just went on his show. His episode will be out soon, but everyone should go check it out. We're talking a lot about the unity idea, and we think in a Mosh Gabbard ticket running in the unity movement with ballot access from the Libertarian Party makes the most sense, and we think we need to start talking about it now. But that's not what we're actually going to talk about on this show, but go check out that show to hear more about that. We're actually going to talk about religion a little bit, and I posted a video on Wednesday or something, and it got a lot of heat because I think I offended some people with what I said. I did rewatch the video, and I don't think I said anything out of line, but I just wanted to have a conversation with someone who has mutual respect for me, and we can show people that just like with politics, you can disagree with someone and you can even think that what they believe is ridiculous, but you can still respect them and realize that because you think differently in a certain area doesn't delegitimize the fact that someone can be intelligent or caring, whatever you want to say. So we have marveled at the fact that how we agree a lot politically, which is rare for me. I don't know too many people that agree with me on much, but this is an area we disagree on. So why don't you just tell us like what your beliefs are? I don't want to paraphrase your beliefs and then have you deconstruct them. So why don't you just let us know?
Okay. So I'll kind of start with the fact, growing up in the Bible Belt, obviously church was a regular thing every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. So I grew up in church, going to youth group. When I got old enough, I was teaching, classes to the younger kids. My mother is actually heavily involved in the missions work there. I've gone on missions trips myself. My father is what considered the head elder, or basically the head of the board of the church. My brother is actually up in Minnesota finishing up seminary. So it's fair to say that, Christianity is something that's a major part of my life. I grew up in a non-denominational church that was, if I ever had to put it any way, I've always said that it leans Pentecostal, but not Pentecostal holiness, which is like a lot more of the further out there kind of like, I don't want to badmouth it, but Pentecostal holiness sometimes gets a bad rap for being a little wild in some of the things that they do. I currently go to a non-denominational church, and I go every Sunday. So I guess the way that I would kind of narrow it down to something is I don't feel like, just like I don't believe in parties, I don't believe like denominations do anything but create division. And I think probably part of that's because I grew up in a non-denominational church where people who are Baptist or Episcopalian or anything, came, and so there was a lot of varied perception and beliefs in terms of what is or is not the right way to do Christianity. And I look at it a lot more as a relational thing. It's not. I hate religion like as a phrase or as a term, because that implies ritualistic or act based salvation, because to be religious is to follow a certain set of criteria to a T in order to obtain that which is promised, so to speak. And that's not what I've grew up learning what Christianity is. I've grown up learning and believing and acting on it as a relational thing between yourself and God.
Yeah. So, as you know, and most of the viewers will know by now, I'm an apostate. It's not that I've never been religious. I grew up very similarly to you, extremely active in the church. I went to Christian camp every summer. I actually went on a missions trip to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And I am totally familiar with the Pentecostal stuff you're talking about. I was neck deep in it in a lot of different scenarios. So I'm certainly aware. I've read the whole Bible, parts of it multiple times. And I just want people to know, like, I do understand the faith inside and out, and I've seen good sides of it and ugly sides of it. I wanted to touch on what you were talking about, religion and your hatred for that term. And I would say before I became an atheist, I was an anti-religious person of faith for a while. So I believed the principles of the faith. I believed in Jesus and that he died for our sins, but I detested the church. I detested the dogmatic BS that was going on all the time. And I saw Christians as some of the biggest hypocrites ever. I thought Jesus would be flipping their tables over, like they were the modern day Pharisees, because you'd have people who kind of used religion as an excuse for bigotry or for self-righteousness or whatever. So I've always detested that. And before I fully let go of Christianity, the Trump train of 2016 happened, and I saw how many Christians jumped on board with that, and it kind of blew my mind. But I just want your reaction to that stuff, like kind of dive into what you mean by religion and the hypocrisy, and what have you seen?
Like just the fact that, I agree with the fact that prayer for the people who lead in any sort of capacity, and that's something you'll hear. I think you'd hear a lot in churches, like, hey, pray for our leaders, regardless of who they are. And I agree with that 100%. But there's almost like Trump appealed to the Christian mindset a whole lot, and a lot of people just took that and ate it up as like he's the next great Christian president. And anybody who takes like any half a step back and like really looks at it objectively, he does not have like hardly anything at all that embodies like Christianity. Like he's very rash, very judgmental, very haughty. Like you name the 7 deadly sins, and he's espoused them in some sort of way, I'm sure. And so when I say religion, I think, like I said this, like I feel like it kind of ends up kind of like a team mindset, like us and them, like that. Coming from a psychology background, that's inherent in us and human nature, us versus them, period. It was always safer to assume somebody different was a threat than to welcome them into your fold and they have a disease you aren't immune to and your whole village gets wiped out. Like, for survival's sake, us versus them, it was established way early on. You kill the person who's different because they might be a threat. And that you see that bleed over in politics, red versus blue. You see that in Christianity, Christian versus non-Christian, Christian versus atheist, probably is a more combative one. And you even see that within Christianity, Baptist versus Pentecostal, and Methodist versus Catholic, and all like it becomes a team mindset, and that's where it's like, well, my team, my religion is better. We got it right. Like, and I'm sure that's something that you, me, like anybody, like I don't feel like Baptists got it right. I don't feel like Pentecostals got it right. Like, it's not like, well, we figured out the Bible. We figured it out, guys. Everybody else is wrong. Like, that's like silly. And that's why I think it's relational. And I think that's because a relationship is dynamic. Any real relationship you have with somebody that has depth and that has meaning and true give and take is fluid, is dynamic. There's points where you're going to not talk to each other for long periods of time. And if it's a true friendship, a true relationship, you aren't going to be all of a sudden not friends, you know? But I feel like religion in itself, in terms of like, go to church Sunday, you know, follow these rules and always do this and always do this. I think there's nothing inherently wrong with the things that are pushed in terms of like having a daily devotional, having time of prayer, meditation, and attending church and having that fellowship. There's nothing wrong with it. But when you start doing that and being like, that's how you be a Christian, that's how you earn Christianity, that's how you earn salvation, that's how you define yourself as a Christian, then you're doing it for the wrong reason. You know, you're doing it for gain. You know, I'm doing this to get this, rather than having a relationship and having an open back of somebody. Like, if I only did things for you to get things from you, that wouldn't last. You know, like, that has no depth. The moment I stop doing things, it would be the moment it's transactional and it doesn't work. Like, it's, you know, a transaction has an ending point. In religion, in terms of like following like the guidelines of how to be a Christian, if you're doing it for its own sake to be a Christian, so you can check off the list, then you're not investing anything. You're checking off a list and it's transactional. And the moment you miss one thing on that list, you're going to feel like you aren't a Christian anymore, and everybody's going to act like you aren't a Christian anymore. But if it's a relational thing, I can offend you one day and we're still going to be friends, you know? Like, if you build that relationship, if it's something that's real and invested and not religion, then it's real. It's not transactional. Sorry, I kind of circled around and babbled a little bit, but I think
that's good. I mean, I think you brought up good points, and I don't have any issues with faith. You know, like the idea of faith. I think I've seen it change people's lives in a positive way, and when I considered myself a Christian, I think a couple times, you know, it had a positive impact on me. You know, it helped me push through some things. I had some personal experiences that I couldn't explain that I would, you know, I would accredit to God. So I don't think it's a bad thing. What I think is bad is the absoluteness of faith and religion. So faith and religion can kind of overlap, and I think it's that absolutism where the overlapping is, because faith is a personal thing, like you said.
Right.
When it starts to become absolute, like, well, this is my experience, so it's got to be this way for everyone, that's when it becomes dangerous in my mind. So the first time I thought that, you know, religion didn't make any sense was, or this wouldn't have been the first time, but it was one of the times. I was at this camp that I was talking about, and the counselor told us that, you know, all Catholics go to hell. And I was just like, how can you say that? What if, you know, and this was at a time when I was still a pretty stark Christian, and I said, you know, they've asked for forgiveness from Jesus, and they believe he died for their sins, so why would they go to hell? And he was like, oh, well, you know, they pray to a statue of Mary, and they believe in purgatory and all this stuff that's obviously not real, because we know. And I was like, yeah, that's just ridiculous. So it started with the denominations, and then for me, it just got more and more generalized. I was like, okay, why can I say that a Muslim goes to hell? What empirical evidence do I have of that? Why is God going to operate out of the small box that I put him into. It seems like Jesus specifically cared a lot more about the condition of people's hearts than their religious state. That's why the religious leaders hated him. And then it just got more and more general, and to the point where my vision of God just didn't match the Bible anymore. So I had to clean the slate and figure out where I stood. But my issue with religion is that you can't question it, because if you start questioning it, then you're not a faithful servant of the Lord anymore, or you're listening to the devil or whatever. And then there's also, like, you weren't supposed to hang out with a certain group of people unless you're witnessing to them. Like they're going to lead you astray. You don't want to listen to them. You want to, spend time with other Christians. Only talk to those people. I mean, love them, but only talk to them if they're, if you're trying to lead them the right way. If you hang out with them too much, you'll start swearing and you'll start disbelieving. That stuff to me is just like so toxic, and I wish we could.
It is.
Oh my God. Species beyond it.
Well, I think, and this, I'm having grown up, and I'm sure you know it too. Like, did Jesus just go hang around people to, like, give them a gospel tract, so to speak? I mean, the gospel was being written at the time, but like he went to dinner with them, he went to things with them, like, and that's why the Pharisees hated him. Like, he's hanging out with sinners. Like, and it's so funny that like, people want to preach, like, literally. Like, in that scenario, like, don't hang out with those bad people unless you're witnessing, is like exactly what the Pharisees were like. They were like, don't hang out with the sinners. they aren't saved. Like, yeah, and that's what it kind of goes back to. It's like, it's relational, not just like between me and God, but like the guy on the street corner yelling with the Bible, whether he's yelling, like, there's a lot of different type of, like, street corner preachers. There's like the Westboro Baptist Church people who preach all that, like, hellfire, brimstone, like, everybody's going to hell stuff. And then there's people who, across the spectrum, some who are a lot more, loving or whatever, regardless of how they're preaching, they're yelling at people, in some capacity, whether in a loving way or not. Like, they're talking at people. And I think that's where a lot of people, like, misconstrue, like, yeah, Jesus taught sermons and stuff, but he went and like had relationships with people. Like, he went into the places and made friends with people. And that's where I think my feeling about it expands even further. It's like, you have to have a relationship. If I come up to some random person and say, dude, you're living wrong, blah blah blah, tell them about the gospel, tell them about this, or even if it's like anything at all, like even something innocuous, like, dude, you're tying your shoe wrong, like, your shoe looks stupid, who's going to be open to a stranger coming up and criticizing how they're living just out of the blue? Anybody? Would you be receptive of that? And that's where it becomes relational. Like, you have to build that relationship with somebody before it becomes a place, like, where that's even a conversation to have. Like, this, me and you, like, this conversation wouldn't have happened like in June when we first, like, started hanging out. Like, we were still like, hey, you post some funny stuff on Twitter, like, let's talk about my atheism versus your Christianity. It wouldn't have worked. Maybe it would have, because we're both kind of open-minded like that, but you know what I mean? Like, you have to have that, and that's what people, I feel like that's where it goes wrong all the time, and people just kind of ignore that aspect of Jesus sometimes. And it sounds like that's what like what you've been, I've experienced it too, but whatever, like, it's not about yelling and talking at somebody. And I mean, that's how it is with anything, really,
Yeah. So this is where I had to eventually part with Christianity as a faith, as opposed to a religion, is that, I kind of used to say what you were just saying there. Like, I liked this friendly, like, just compassionate version of Jesus, and, the anti-religious aspect of him, the anti-establishment aspect of him, the hanging out with the hookers and the lowlives, like, I was like, yeah, this is Jesus. The problem is Jesus ends up being just as authoritarian as his dad. I'll put it that way. Jesus talks a lot more about hell than he talks about heaven when he was on earth. And there are lots of passages where he says explicitly, I am the way, the truth, and the life. There is no one to the Father but through me. Or don't fear the one who can destroy your body, fear the one who can destroy your soul in hell for eternity. Like he gives these parables where he is the one who will ask his father to pardon you, basically. So there's that's what I couldn't square in the end, and it's not that I just didn't like it, I just didn't believe it. I couldn't believe that a loving God would judge people eternally based on such subjective temporary circumstances. So if there were someone who never heard the word of the gospel, I knew people in my church who would say, well, that person just automatically goes to hell. And I was like, no, there's no way. That doesn't make any sense. But then also, if you are a product of your life, like as much as we hate to admit it, there are certain things that are intrinsic to us that we're going to act a certain way, where someone else who goes through the exact same circumstances will act a different way. But there are a lot of things that we do just because of how we're reacting to things that happen to us. So the life that is put in front of you, to an extent, dictates what you believe. Like, you're not even in control of it. Your beliefs, if they're honest, are not desires. Like, if you're openly looking at life, you are going to accidentally arrive at a conclusion. You're not. Otherwise, you're saying, okay, I want to be this, and you're going to push things out of your way that you don't like that would otherwise push you in a different direction because you're aiming for this goal. Whereas if you're saying, okay, I just want truth, you don't know where you're going to end up because it's a mystery. You're going to find it's like if you're investigating a crime scene and you're just trying to figure out who the criminal is. You're just going to look for evidence and try to come up with whoever did the crime. But then if you juxtapose that to a crime scene that you show up at where your brother has been convicted of doing the crime, you're going to look for every bit of evidence you can to point to the fact that it wasn't him, and you're going to, if you find something damning, you're going to be like, ooh, I'm going to, I'm going to ignore that. I don't like that. So if that is the way that humans arrive at truth, it seems unfair that they would be eternally judged based on such subjective temporary circumstances. And I agree with you on religion versus faith. There's a whole ton of bullshit that religion brings. But even when it came down to just the pure faith, I realized that in the book, if the book is the word of God, Jesus did say these things that I can't square with as being moral anymore. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Or?
Yeah, and it does. And I've went through that stage too, where, and I'm not saying you're in a stage, but I went through that process of like, that a loving God, why would he cast somebody off to eternal damnation if he's such a loving God? And I think this is just this is probably the point where we end up diverging, you and I more specifically, because up to this point we've kind of had the exact same concept of views and perceptions about it all. But I think this is where I thought on this. Like I have a very logical way of thinking a lot of times. My dad was an engineer, and I did engineering for a little bit in college, not a whole lot. But I still have that same logic based, overanalyzing mindset in a lot of ways, and a lot of things that I do. And so I went down that path that, okay, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that, and then that doesn't make sense. And I dealt with it for a while. And for me, what it ended up being was, why am I somebody who's mortal, temporal, restrained by time, trying to understand, based on my beliefs, somebody who is eternal and outside of time. And like, there's no way to use human logic to discern the actions or intentions of a beyond human being, a divine being, in God. And for me, this is a little fun word picture I like to use that somebody told me one time. It's essentially the same as like a pancake trying to understand the person cooking them. Mm-hmm. Like the discrepancy in like intellect and understanding is essentially that. Like, we're a pancake trying to understand the cook. And a pancake can't even begin to grasp the reality of what a human is. And to take something so divine and eternal and even like you said, try to fit it into this little box and say, this is how you make sense. It's not going to work. So to me, I submitted that to my faith, and like, I'm not going to understand why things are the way they are. And I'm not going to, I think that's terrible. Like, that this person this would happen to that person, or this person would go to hell or whatever, like, undetermined, whether we aren't the judge who decides who does or doesn't. Obviously some do, but to try and understand something that is so far beyond human capabilities, it just is that's where my faith took over. And it was like, I'm never going to understand it. Like, there's never going to be a point in my mortal life where that's going to be something that's been, oh yeah, now it makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess
I can do all the magic mushrooms and all the marijuana I wanted, and it'd still be beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I put I am the same way in some ways. There are things that I realize I'm just never going to know and never understand. And they're almost the opposite things that a lot of people of faith or religion are okay with not understanding. So to me, the idea of hell, or the idea that the Bible is infallible, or that, I have to believe all these stories, it's easier for me to say, you know what, I don't know how the world came into being. I don't know what happens after I die, but I do know, or I shouldn't say no, but I strongly feel that like A, B, and C is bullshit. Like, I can't accept these things because they don't make any sense. So to me, it's weird that some people are okay with accepting, like, okay, I know that I'm going to go here when I die. I know this is how the world came into being. And then, if you would try to apply some of the things that God rules into any other area of their lives, they would be vehemently opposed to it. So if the United States government were run the way that God runs things, he's way into thought police. He's like, there's no 3 strikes. Like, it's, if you don't believe in me, you're done. There's all this like absolutism that if it were applied to a government or something, it would be absolutely tyrannical, and we'd do everything we could to overthrow that government. But they're okay with the idea that in eternal life, and it seems like a lot of the times it's to comfort their idea that, okay, well, I know how I got here. I know what happens to me after I die. So these things I'm willing to shelve. It's just not enough for me. Like, for me, it's the other way. Like, I don't know how I got here. I don't know what happens after I die. Nobody does. But there are certain things that have been pushed on us by religions for hundreds of years that I'm just not willing to accept as truth. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Or?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess the worst thing about religion to me is the idea of hell, because I really think that's I think religion's a man-made construct, but I think that specifically is an extremely effective tool to keep people in line and keep them from thinking about anything outside of their bubble. That's what I really wish would go away. Like as I said earlier, I don't have any issues with faith. I don't have any issues with people believing in something higher, a higher power. I think it has a positive effect in a lot of ways. That to me is like really the crux of religion, is the idea that if other people think something different than I do, they burn forever. I just can't get over that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see that, and I can see how it's like, if Christianity is practiced how it's supposed to be, that's where, what you're talking about is like, oh, they are going to hell, but we should love them. That's where, and I'm sure so I'm not preaching to the choir. So, but that's where it comes into like, okay, well, if you do believe that, then that would be a reason to go and build that relationship with them, and go and show them a belief system, or show them what you believe, and show them how it has positively affected your life, and how. And I'm trying to tread lightly here because I don't want to speak in absolutes, and even though I absolutely believe it, I'm trying to be objective here. But so like you don't want them to go to hell, so you're gonna say, hey, I have, if you're the perfect Christian, you have that compassion for every single person you interact with, and you want to show them through action and not beat them over the head with the Bible
Right.
about what salvation is. Like, that's just to put it real simple.
Yeah. And I'm also trying to tread lightly because I don't I don't know everything either. I am rather convicted in my beliefs, but I think that to me, religious atheists, who I would call like anti-theists, are the most annoying group, because disproving something is impossible pretty much. I mean, it's like if you're trying to say like, prove to me there's no needle in that haystack, it's a lot easier to prove that there is a needle. You've just got to find a needle. There it is, and then If you're trying to say there is no needle in that haystack, you have to go through that whole haystack 100 million times till you're sure you haven't found a needle in it, and then you can say there's no needle there. So trying to prove a negative is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
I always say the proof of burden lies on the person who is making the claim. So I'm just not willing to make a claim. I don't believe in God or any God, but I'm not going to make the absolute claim that he doesn't exist. I don't see how anyone can make that claim without admitting that they're overstepping their boundaries, because it's just ridiculous. But in general, I just want people to be honest and admit, like, well, I don't know. So let's talk about why I have arrived where I am. Because the only way we get any closer to truth is speaking with people we disagree with. Like, I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't first started questioning what I thought by listening to people who disagreed with me. If I just stayed in my little echo chamber and never crossed the aisle, my views would never evolve. And it's also a sign that I'm intellectually weak, or intellectually unstable. Yeah. Like, if I believe what I think is true, I should be willing to go talk to people who don't agree with me about it. It has a lot of overlap with politics.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about. Like, was that pre-stream or was that pre-video? But yeah, that, like, how I started off saying, it's my team, your team. Like, it's that us versus them mentality that just creates and sows and perpetuates division.
Right.
It is. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll have to continue this conversation in the future, but we're as I said, as we discussed, we're going to try to go on each other's show more often, and we're going to be talking about the areas we do agree in a lot, because we want to get those conversations rolling for the future, because the future is not bright, regardless of what people want to say. And if we want good ideas to win, we need to start pushing for them now. But I'll just give you the last word, and then we'll close out.
This is conversation that needs to happen, whether it's things from a religious standpoint to a social standpoint to a political standpoint. There needs to be a civil discussion about places you disagree, and even, I think, more so places where you do agree. And I think continuing down that path is going to show us that we have a lot more in common than the powers that be want us to think we do. And by giving voice to that conversation and removing the adversarial mindset that has been just totally given free reign in not only politics, but in general, then by continuing that, there's going to be a shift. And that shift is going to be for a better, just a better betterment everywhere. So.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, as I said, I'll have you back on. I'll put a link in the description to your Twitter account, but I'm sure most of the people who watch me already follow you there. But stay
now they know what it looks like.
Yeah. But stay tuned, everyone. We'll catch you on the next show.